I've been thinking about the moment everything changed between Marcus and me, and I keep coming back to those 5 words that shifted my entire world. If this story resonates with you, drop a heart in the comments below. It started 3 months ago when Marcus moved into the apartment next door. I remember hearing the moving truck rumble to a stop outside our building on a Saturday morning, the sound of boxes scraping against the hallway walls, and then his voice apologizing to someone about the narrow staircase. Even through my closed door, something about his tone caught my attention. It was warm, considerate, the kind of voice that made you want to listen longer. I didn't meet him that day, though I found myself lingering by my window more than usual, catching glimpses of him carrying boxes. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that caught the sunlight and shoulders that filled out his gray t-shirt in a way that made me look twice. When he smiled at the elderly woman from downstairs who offered to help, something in my chest tightened unexpectedly. The first time we actually spoke was 2 weeks later in the building's laundry room. I was folding clothes, lost in thought about a presentation I had to give at work, when he walked in carrying a basket of wrinkled shirts. He looked frustrated, running his hand through his hair in a way that made it stick up at odd angles. "I don't suppose you know anything about getting wrinkles out of dress shirts without an iron?" he asked, and when I looked up, his eyes were this incredible shade of green, like sea glass held up to sunlight. "Actually, yeah," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Throw them in the dryer with a damp towel for about 10 minutes. Works like magic." His face lit up with relief. "You're a lifesaver. I'm Marcus, by the way. I think I'm your new neighbor." "Ryan," I replied, and when he smiled, I felt something shift inside me, like a door opening that I hadn't even realized was closed. That became our routine. We'd run into each other in the hallway, by the mailboxes, in the laundry room, and each conversation lasted a little longer than the last. I learned that he was a graphic designer who worked mostly with nonprofits, that he'd moved here from Portland for a fresh start after a relationship ended, and that he had an almost encyclopedic knowledge of obscure coffee shops and used bookstores. What struck me most was how easy it was to talk to him. With most people, I felt like I was performing, carefully choosing words and monitoring reactions. But with Marcus, conversation flowed like water finding its natural course. He'd ask about my work as a software developer, and instead of his eyes glazing over like most people's did, he'd lean in closer, asking follow-up questions that showed he was actually listening. The first time he knocked on my door was on a Thursday evening in October. I'd just gotten home from work, still wearing my button-down shirt and tie, when I heard the gentle rap against my door. Through the peephole, I could see him holding what looked like a plate covered with aluminum foil. "I made way too much lasagna," he said when I opened the door, and I caught the scent of garlic and herbs that made my mouth water. "Thought you might want some. Unless you're one of those people who doesn't trust their neighbor's cooking." "I'm definitely not one of those people," I said, accepting the plate. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I felt a jolt of electricity that I tried to ignore. "This smells incredible." "Family recipe," he said, then paused. "Well, family recipe that I found on the internet and modified heavily. But it's good." I laughed, and he grinned back, and for a moment we just stood there in my doorway, the air between us charged with something I couldn't quite name. "Do you want to come in?" I asked before I could stop myself. I was just about to order takeout, but this is obviously much better. He hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." That evening stretched into hours. We sat on my couch, sharing the lasagna straight from the dish, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in a small town in Oregon, about his parents who still called him every Sunday, about the ex-boyfriend who'd left him feeling like he wasn't enough. I found myself sharing things I rarely told anyone, about my own struggles with coming out, about the loneliness that sometimes felt like a physical weight in my chest. "It's funny," he said at one point, his voice soft in the lamplight. "I've lived in bigger cities, had more friends, but I've never felt as comfortable with someone as I do with you." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. He was studying his hands, a slight flush coloring his cheeks, and I realized that this easy intimacy between us might mean something more than neighborly friendship. The thought should have scared me. I'd spent years building walls around myself, keeping people at a safe distance. But sitting there with Marcus, sharing stories and comfortable silences, those walls felt less like protection and more like prison bars. After that night, our friendship deepened into something that felt both natural and terrifying. He'd text me during the day, random thoughts or funny observations that made me smile in the middle of meetings. I'd find myself looking forward to his messages, checking my phone more often than I cared to admit. We started spending more time together. He'd invite me to check out new restaurants he'd discovered, and I'd suggest hiking trails or museums I thought he'd enjoy. Every outing felt like a date, but neither of us acknowledged it out loud. We existed in this space between friendship and something more, and I found myself both treasuring and dreading the ambiguity. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. I started noticing things about him that went beyond friendly appreciation. The way he'd bite his lower lip when he was concentrating on something. How his eyes crinkled when he laughed at his own jokes. The graceful way he moved through space, like he was always slightly dancing to music only he could hear. One evening in November, we were walking back from dinner at a small Italian place he'd found, the kind of hole-in-the-wall restaurant that served the best food in the city. The air was crisp, and our breath formed small clouds as we talked. He was telling me about a project he was working on, his hands gesturing animatedly as he described his vision for a series of posters about environmental conservation. The whole point is to make people feel something, he was saying, his voice passionate. Facts and statistics are important, but they don't change hearts. You need to make people care on an emotional level. I found myself watching his profile as he spoke, the way the streetlights caught the angles of his face, and I realized with startling clarity that I was falling for him. Not the gentle, gradual slide I'd experienced with other people, but a sudden, overwhelming rush of feeling that left me breathless. The realization terrified me. Marcus had become my closest friend, the person I looked forward to seeing most. If I told him how I felt, and he didn't feel the same way, I could lose everything we'd built together. But keeping it inside felt like trying to hold back a tide. Things came to a head the week before Thanksgiving. I'd been working late, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Are you awake? Could really use a friend right now." I called him immediately. His voice sounded strained, distant in a way that made my chest tighten with worry. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Can I come over? I know it's late, but I need to not be alone right now." "Of course. Come over." He arrived at my door 20 minutes later, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. His usually bright eyes were dim, his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. He was wearing an old sweatshirt and jeans, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. "What happened?" I asked, leading him to the couch. He sat down heavily, his hands clasped between his knees. "I got a call from my ex tonight. Derek. He wanted to check in and see how I was doing." The name hit me like a physical blow. Derek was the ex-boyfriend who'd left Marcus feeling inadequate, the one who'd prompted his move across the country. Marcus rarely talked about him, but when he did, I could see the pain that still lingered. "He's getting married," Marcus continued, his voice flat. "To someone he met 3 months after we broke up." 3 months, Ryan. We were together for 2 years, and it took him 3 months to find someone he wanted to marry. I sat down beside him, close enough that our knees almost touched. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard to hear." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The worst part is, he sounded genuinely happy, like he'd found exactly what he was looking for. And I'm sitting here, 31 years old, wondering if there's something fundamentally wrong with me that makes me impossible to love. "There's nothing wrong with you," I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Derek was an idiot if he couldn't see what he had. Marcus looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something vulnerable and raw in his expression. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just not the kind of person people fall in love with. Like I'm destined to be the good friend, the safe option, but never the one someone can't live without. My heart broke for him. This incredible, kind, funny, beautiful man who thought he was somehow lacking. I wanted to tell him how wrong he was, wanted to list all the reasons someone would be lucky to love him, but the words stuck in my throat because they would reveal too much about my own feelings. "You're wrong," I said instead. "You're completely wrong about that." He shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe I'm just not built for the kind of love that lasts. Maybe I'm too much or not enough or just." "Stop," I said, turning to face him fully. "Just stop. You're talking about yourself like you're broken, and you're not. You're one of the best people I know." Something in my tone must have gotten through to him because he went quiet, studying my face in the dim light of my living room. "You really believe that?" he asked softly. "I know it. I replied, and the certainty in my voice surprised even me. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. I could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, could sense that whatever happened next would change everything between us. "Ryan," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Being here with you, in this apartment, talking about this stuff. It's the first time all day that I've felt like I could breathe properly. Actually, it's been like that since I moved here. Whenever I'm with you, everything else just quiets down." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft and uncertain. "I mean that you feel like home to me, like the safest place in the world." The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside me crack open. Not break, but open, like a flower finally receiving sunlight. "Marcus," I started, but he held up a hand. "I know this might be weird," he said quickly. "I know we're friends, and I don't want to mess that up. But sitting here tonight, after that phone call, all I could think about was how much I wanted to be with you. Not just as friends, but more than that." I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "You mean?" I mean, I think I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Actually, I think I've been falling in love with you for weeks, maybe months. And I know that might change everything between us, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore." The relief that flooded through me was so intense, it was almost painful. All those weeks of wondering, of hoping, of being afraid to hope, and here he was, feeling the same impossible thing I was feeling. "Marcus," I said, reaching for his hand. "I've been in love with you since that night you brought me lasagna." His eyes widened. "Really? Really? I've been terrified to tell you because I didn't want to lose what we have. But what we have is already so much more than friendship." He squeezed my hand, and I could see tears gathering in his eyes. "I can't believe this is real." "It's real," I said, moving closer to him on the couch. "You're real, and this is real, and Derek was the biggest fool in the world for letting you go." Marcus laughed, and this time it was full of joy. "I can't believe I was so scared to tell you. All this time, I've been thinking about how you make me feel safe, how being with you feels like coming home, and I was terrified you'd think I was crazy." "Not crazy," I said, reaching up to touch his face. "Just human. Just someone who deserves to be loved exactly as much as he loves other people." He leaned into my touch, his eyes closing briefly. "I love you, Ryan. I love your terrible jokes and the way you get excited about coding problems and how you always remember to ask about my projects. I love that you make me feel like I'm enough, exactly as I am. I love you too," I said, and saying the words out loud felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. "I love your passion for your work and the way you see beauty in everything and how you make me feel like the most interesting person in the world when you listen to me talk." We sat there for a moment, hands clasped, looking at each other like we were seeing something new and wonderful. Then Marcus leaned forward, slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to. I met him halfway, and when our lips touched, it was soft and sweet and full of all the words we'd been too afraid to say. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we figure it out together," I said. "We take it one day at a time and see where this goes." "I'd like that," he said, smiling. "I'd like that a lot." We stayed up talking until nearly dawn, sharing all the moments when we'd almost said something, all the times we'd wondered if the other person felt the same way. It was like finally being able to speak in our native language after months of careful translation. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with Marcus curled against my side, his head on my chest. For a moment, I thought I might be dreaming, but then he stirred and looked up at me with sleepy eyes and a soft smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," I replied, running my fingers through his hair. "How are you feeling?" "Like the luckiest person alive," he said, and I could hear the wonder in his voice. "Is it weird that I'm not scared anymore? Yesterday I was terrified that I was unlovable, and now I feel like I could take on the world." "Not weird at all," I said. "That's what love does. It makes you brave." He pushed himself up to look at me properly. "I meant what I said last night, about you being my safe place. I've never felt that with anyone before." "You're mine too," I said, and I meant it completely. "You make me feel like I can be myself without apology." Over the following weeks, we navigated the transition from friends to something more with surprising ease. We'd already built a foundation of trust and genuine affection, so adding romance felt natural rather than jarring. We still had our easy conversations and comfortable silences, but now they were punctuated by stolen kisses and gentle touches. I loved learning the romantic side of Marcus. How he'd leave little notes in my apartment when he visited, how he'd text me pictures of things that reminded him of me throughout the day, how he'd curl up against me while we watched movies, fitting perfectly against my side like he was made to be there. He was affectionate in ways that surprised me. He'd reach for my hand when we walked down the street, completely unself-conscious about public displays of affection. He'd kiss my forehead when he left for work in the morning, a gesture so tender it made my heart ache in the best possible way. The first time he really stayed over, was about 3 weeks after our confession. We'd been taking things slowly, both of us aware that we were building something precious that deserved care and attention. But that night, after dinner and a movie and hours of talking, when he started to gather his things to go back to his apartment, I found myself asking him to stay. "Are you sure?" he asked, and I could see the hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "I'm sure," I said. "I want you to stay. I want to wake up with you." He smiled, soft and radiant. "I want that too." We lay in bed that night, facing each other in the darkness, talking in whispers about everything and nothing. He told me about his dreams for his art, about places he wanted to travel, about the life he was building for himself. I shared my own hopes and fears, my plans for the future that were already beginning to include him. "I never thought I'd have this," he said at one point, his fingers tracing patterns on my chest. "This feeling of being completely known by someone and loved anyway. You deserve this," I said, catching his hand and bringing it to my lips. "You deserve all of this and more." "So do you," he replied. "We both do." When I woke up the next morning with Marcus still sleeping beside me, his hair messy and his face peaceful, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. This was what I'd been missing, what I'd been searching for without even knowing it. Not just romance, but partnership. Not just attraction, but deep, abiding love. The holidays that year were different than any I'd experienced before. Instead of the usual quiet solitude, I had Marcus to share them with. We cooked Thanksgiving dinner together in my kitchen, laughing as we tried to coordinate multiple dishes and nearly burned the rolls. We spent Christmas morning exchanging gifts and drinking coffee in our pajamas, and I couldn't remember ever feeling so perfectly content. Marcus gave me a small framed print that night, something he'd designed himself. It was a simple illustration of two figures sitting close together, surrounded by warm light, with the words "safe place" written in elegant script below. I wanted to capture that feeling, he explained as I stared at the print, my throat tight with emotion. The feeling of being exactly where you belong. "It's perfect," I managed to say. "You're perfect." "Not perfect," he said, kissing my cheek. "Just perfectly matched to you." As winter turned to spring, our relationship deepened and evolved. We had our first fight in February, a stupid argument about whose turn it was to do laundry that escalated, because we were both stressed about work deadlines. But even fighting with Marcus felt different than fighting with anyone else. We were both committed to working through it, to understanding each other's perspective rather than just being right. "I don't want to be the kind of couple that fights dirty," he said as we sat on my couch afterward. The argument resolved, but the tension still lingering. "We won't be," I said. "We're too good together for that." "How do you know?" he asked, and I could hear the vulnerability in the question. "Because we both care more about us than about being right," I said. "Because we're both willing to do the work." He smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from him all day. "I love that about us. I love that we're a team." "Always," I said, and I meant it. By the time our 1-year anniversary rolled around, we'd settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortably domestic. We'd essentially moved in together, though we still maintained both apartments. Most nights, we'd end up in one place or the other, cooking dinner together, watching movies, talking about our days. Marcus had started leaving more of his things at my place, and I'd done the same at his. We developed our own routines and inside jokes, our own ways of communicating without words. He'd learned that I got grumpy when I was hungry and would wordlessly hand me a snack during long work sessions. I'd learned that he needed quiet time to decompress after particularly stressful days and would give him space without him having to ask. We were planning a weekend trip to celebrate our anniversary, a cabin in the mountains where we could hike during the day and spend the evenings by the fireplace. But the night before we were supposed to leave, Marcus seemed unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked as we packed our bags. He paused, holding a sweater in his hands. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever think about the future?" "Like our future?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't think about it, but because I thought about it constantly. I thought about waking up next to Marcus for years to come, about traveling together, about building a life that was truly ours. "All the time," I said honestly. "Do you?" He nodded, then sat down on the edge of the bed. "I think about us getting a place together, officially. I think about meeting your parents and you meeting mine. I think about—" He paused, looking down at his hands. "I think about forever, Ryan." "Is that crazy?" My heart swelled with so much love I thought it might burst. "Not crazy at all. I think about forever too." He looked up at me then, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Really, really, I think about growing old with you, about all the adventures we'll have and all the quiet moments we'll share. I think about how lucky I am that you knocked on my door with that lasagna." He laughed, wiping at his eyes. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," I said, moving to sit beside him on the bed. "What was the first?" "Telling me you loved me. Telling me I was your safe place." He leaned against me, and I wrapped my arms around him. "You are, you know. You'll always be my safe place." "And you're mine," I said, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Always." That weekend in the mountains was perfect in the way that only simple pleasures can be. We hiked through forests that were just beginning to show hints of spring green, cooked meals over the cabin's small stove, and spent long evenings talking by the fire. On our last night, as we lay in bed listening to the wind in the trees outside, Marcus turned to me with a serious expression. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Okay," I said, suddenly nervous. "Are you happy? Really, truly happy with us, with this?" The question surprised me. "Of course I am." "Why would you ask that?" "Because sometimes I look at you and I can't believe this is real. I can't believe someone like you would choose someone like me. And I guess I'm scared that someday you'll realize you could do better." I sat up, looking down at him in the dim light filtering through the cabin's windows. "Marcus, listen to me. There is no better. There's no one else I want to be with, no other life I want to live. You're not just someone I settled for or someone who's good enough. You're everything I didn't even know I was looking for." "But what if?" "No what ifs," I said firmly. "I love you. Not despite who you are, but because of who you are. I love your kindness and your creativity and your terrible sense of direction. I love how you make me laugh and how you listen when I need to talk. I love that you see the best in people and that you make me want to be better than I am." He reached up to touch my face, his thumb brushing across my cheek. "I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared. The kind of scared that means something matters." I leaned down to kiss him, soft and slow and full of promise. "Then we're both exactly where we need to be." The next morning, as we packed up to leave the cabin, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. A year ago, I'd been content with my quiet, solitary life. I'd convinced myself that I didn't need anyone else, that independence was the same thing as strength. But Marcus had shown me that true strength came from vulnerability, from opening yourself up to another person and trusting them with your heart. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing my contemplative mood as we loaded our bags into the car. "Just how different everything is now," I said. "How different I am." "Different how?" I considered the question as we drove down the winding mountain road. "I used to think that needing someone was a weakness, that the safest way to live was to keep everyone at arm's length. But you've taught me that love isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about becoming more yourself than you ever thought possible." Marcus reached over and took my hand. "You've taught me that too. Before you, I was always trying to be what I thought other people wanted. But with you, I can just be me. And I love who you are," I said, squeezing his hand. "All of it. The good days and the bad days and everything in between. Even when I leave my socks on the floor? Especially then," I said, and he laughed. As we drove back toward the city, toward our life together, I thought about that night almost a year ago when Marcus had sat on my couch, broken and doubting his worth. He'd told me I was his safe place, and in that moment, everything had changed. Not just for him, but for me too. Because the truth was, he'd become my safe place just as much as I'd become his. In a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain, Marcus was my constant. He was the person I wanted to share good news with, the one I turned to when I needed comfort, the one who made even ordinary moments feel special. We'd built something together that was stronger than either of us alone. We'd created a love that was both passionate and peaceful, exciting and secure. We'd found in each other not just a partner, but a home. And as we pulled into our neighborhood, as I saw our building coming into view, I realized that this was just the beginning. We had years ahead of us, decades of mornings and evenings, of adventures and quiet moments, of growing together and supporting each other through whatever life brought our way. Marcus squeezed my hand as we parked, and when I looked at him, I saw my own contentment reflected in his eyes. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "With you?" "Always," I said, and I meant it. Whatever came next, wherever life took us, as long as we had each other, as long as we remained each other's safe place, we could handle anything. That night, as we unpacked our bags and settled back into our routine, Marcus paused in the middle of hanging up his clothes. "Ryan," he said. "Yeah. Thank you." "For what?" "For being exactly who you are. For loving me the way you do. For making me believe in forever." I walked over to him, wrapping my arms around his waist. "Thank you for knocking on my door with that lasagna. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for being my safe place." He smiled, that radiant smile that had been making my heart skip beats for over a year now. "Always," he said, echoing my earlier words. "Always," I agreed and kissed him softly. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, millions of people living their lives, searching for connection, for love, for home. But inside our apartment, in the circle of each other's arms, we'd already found everything we needed. Marcus was right that night when he'd called me his safe place. But what he'd given me in return was even more precious. He'd given me the courage to love without reservation, to trust without fear, to believe in a future that was brighter than anything I'd imagined for myself. As we got ready for bed that night, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of a couple who'd learned each other's rhythms, I caught sight of the framed print Marcus had given me for Christmas. "Safe place," it read, and I smiled, remembering the night that had changed everything. "What are you smiling about?" Marcus asked, noticing my expression. "Just thinking about how lucky we are," I said. "The luckiest," he agreed, pulling me close. And as we settled into bed together, as Marcus curled against my side in the way that had become as natural as breathing, I knew that no matter what tomorrow brought, we'd face it together. We'd built something beautiful and strong, something worth protecting and nurturing for years to come. In the darkness, I felt Marcus's breathing slow and deepen as he drifted off to sleep. I stayed awake a little longer, marveling at the weight of him against me, at the trust implicit in his relaxed posture, at the simple miracle of being loved by someone so completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose each other over and over again. But tonight, in the quiet of our shared space, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I was exactly where I belonged. Marcus stirred slightly in his sleep, murmuring something I couldn't quite catch, and I pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Sweet dreams," I whispered, and settled in beside him, ready for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that we'd face it together. Because that's what love is, I realized. Not just the grand gestures or the passionate declarations, but the quiet moments of choosing each other, day after day, night after night. It's being someone's safe place and having them be yours in return. It's building a life together that's stronger than either of you could create alone. And as sleep finally claimed me, with Marcus warm and solid beside me, I knew that we'd found something rare and precious. We'd found our forever, and it was everything I'd never dared to hope for.